to teach young boys, like, hey, listen to your body, listen to your gut. Don't pledge allegiance to the man club at the expense of your feelings and your heart.
The biggest development yesterday was the unexpected settlement of the case filed by Blake Lively against Justin Baldoni and his film studio, along with his PR team just 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin. This came as a major surprise, especially since both sides had repeatedly insisted there would be no settlement, and that the case would be fought all the way to the end. To understand how things got here, it helps to go back to the beginning. In early 2025, shortly after the lawsuit was filed, Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, spoke about the case and what he expected from the litigation. At the time, the message from Baldoni's side was clear. They were prepared for a full-scale legal and public battle. The dispute stemmed from the film It Ends With Us. Based on the novel by Colleen Hoover, Baldoni had secured the rights to the book and brought Lively on board as the lead actress. According to initial agreements, her role was limited to starring in the film, though she did receive an executive producer credit. Tensions reportedly began during production, with Lively raising concerns about Baldoni's behavior on set. She alleged that certain scenes, including intimate ones, were added without prior agreement and that boundaries were crossed in ways she found inappropriate. After a COVID-related break in filming, she requested that Baldoni sign a detailed list of conditions outlining what he would and would not do moving forward, such as not entering her dressing room unannounced. However, as more details emerged, some of the claims appeared more complicated than they first seemed. For example, one incident involving a dressing room interaction was later described differently, with reports suggesting she had invited him in despite initially raising it as a concern. Moments like this created a conflicting narrative, where depending on which side you heard first, perceptions could shift dramatically. Lively initially filed a complaint with California's civil rights authorities, which somehow made its way into media coverage shortly after. Not long after that, the situation escalated into full legal warfare, with both sides filing lawsuits. Lively accused Baldoni, his company, and his PR team of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. In response, Baldoni countersued, alleging defamation and other claims. As the case moved forward, Baldoni's legal strategy was notably aggressive both in the courtroom and in the public sphere. Under Friedman's guidance, the defense leaned heavily into both legal arguments and media positioning, turning the dispute into not just a legal battle, but a highly visible public showdown. And that's what made the sudden settlement all the more shocking. After months of positioning this as a fight that would go the distance, it ended quietly just before reaching trial, according to Brian Friedman. The legal and public relations strategies in this case were always going to be equally important, but in reality, the PR battle carried even more weight. Having handled numerous high-profile disputes before, he recognized early on that controlling the narrative in the public eye would be just as critical as what happened in court. A few weeks after media coverage, particularly from the New York Times, brought widespread attention to the allegations, Friedman shared his outlook on how the situation would unfold. His prediction was blunt. He believed things would increasingly turn against Blake Lively as more people felt comfortable speaking out. In his view, once serious accusations like harassment and misconduct were made against individuals such as Justin Baldoni and his associates, there was no option but to fully fight back. Friedman emphasized that their approach would center on transparency, putting forward communications like messages, emails, and documents relevant to the case so the public could form its own conclusions. The strategy, he suggested, wasn't about personal attacks but about presenting their version of events as clearly as possible. As the dispute continued, the conflict played out not just in legal filings but across media platforms, with both sides attempting to shape public perception. Over time, this sustained pressure and exposure appeared to take a toll, contributing to a shift in momentum. Ultimately, despite earlier insistence that the case would go all the way to trial, it ended in a settlement. A joint statement released by both parties struck a more unified tone, focusing on the film It Ends With Us based on the novel by Colleen Hoover as a project they were proud to have brought to life. The statement also highlighted a shared goal of raising awareness and making a meaningful impact for survivors of domestic violence. The contrast between the intense public battle and the more measured closing statement underscores just how complex and high stakes this case had become, and why its sudden resolution caught so many off guard. At first glance, the joint statement feels incredibly generic, almost like a standard "go watch the movie, everything's fine" message. But the real substance is buried in the wording that follows, and that's where things get interesting. The line acknowledging that the process presented challenges, and that concerns raised by Blake Lively deserve to be heard may sound simple, but language like this doesn't happen by accident. Statements like these are typically negotiated word by word, often revised countless times until both sides can live with it. You can practically see the compromise baked into it, carefully phrased to acknowledge concerns without conceding any wrongdoing. From a defense perspective, that's about as strong a position as you could hope for. Notice what's not included. There's no mention of specific allegations like harassment or retaliation, just a broad commitment to maintaining professional and respectful workplaces. That kind of wording is intentionally neutral. It avoids validating any particular claim while still sounding responsible and measured. The rest of the statement continues in that same tone, expressing hope for closure and a desire for everyone involved to move forward peacefully. It also calls for a more respectful online environment, which is a subtle nod to the intense public discourse that surrounded the case. What stands out even more is the reported detail covered by outlets like TMZ and Daily Mail that no financial settlement was exchanged. If accurate, that's a significant point. In many high-profile disputes, financial terms are a central part of resolution, so the absence of that element changes how the outcome may be interpreted. Taken together, the neutral language, the lack of specific admissions, and the reported absence of payment all suggest a resolution that prioritizes ending the dispute rather than assigning clear public blame. It allows both sides to step away without a definitive legal judgment being made in court, and that's what makes the ending so striking. After months of escalation, strong public positioning, and expectations of a full trial, the case concludes not with a dramatic courtroom moment, but with a carefully worded statement and a quiet exit. From a public relations standpoint, one interpretation of the situation is that the settlement allows Blake Lively to move forward without further legal escalation, while the final statement remains intentionally broad and neutral. That kind of language focusing on respectful workplaces and general closures, typical in high-profile disputes where neither side wants to lock in specific admissions. The likely result, from a media cycle perspective, is that each side will now attempt to frame the outcome in the most favorable light. In modern celebrity disputes, legal resolution rarely ends the public conversation, it often shifts it. Supporters and critics both tend to interpret silence or neutrality through their own lens, which is why post-settlement narratives can become just as heated as the case itself. More broadly, this speaks to a recurring reality in celebrity culture. Public figures often face intense scrutiny, and responses to that scrutiny vary widely. Some choose to speak out and correct what they see as misinformation, while others prefer to remain quiet and let attention fade over time. Neither approach guarantees a better outcome, each carries its own risks in shaping public perception. What's also clear is that in today's media environment, attention rarely disappears quickly. Even after legal matters are resolved, commentary, debate, and interpretation continue across news outlets and social platforms, often extending the lifespan of the story well beyond the courtroom. Ultimately, this case underscores how difficult it is for any high-profile dispute to stay contained within legal boundaries. Once it becomes part of the public conversation, it evolves into something larger, part legal matter, part media narrative, and part public opinion debate. A different approach in a situation like this might have been something straightforward and self-reflective, something along the lines of, "Some of my tone during the promotion of a film dealing with domestic violence may not have come across as intended. Looking back, I understand how certain moments were perceived, and I recognize why that caused concern." A statement like that would have been a way to acknowledge perception and move forward. Instead, the situation involving Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni escalated into a full legal dispute and a highly public media battle. And once a case reaches that level of visibility, it stops being just about the original disagreement and becomes something much larger in the public eye. From a PR standpoint, moments like this are often defined less by the original incident and more by how the response is handled afterward. When legal action, public statements, and media coverage all overlap, each development tends to amplify attention rather than reduce it. What might have otherwise been a short-lived controversy can end up becoming a long-running public narrative. It's also true that in the digital age, once clips, headlines, and commentary circulate widely, they rarely disappear completely. Instead, they become part of an ongoing conversation where perception is shaped over time by repetition and amplification. This is where PR strategy becomes critical. Some choose to address issues directly and briefly, while others rely on legal processes to respond. Both approaches carry risks. One can fuel immediate backlash, while the other can extend the lifespan of the story. In cases like this, the end result is rarely just legal closure. It becomes a mix of legal resolution, public interpretation, and media framing that continues even after formal statements are issued. If there's a broader takeaway, it's that once a dispute becomes public at this scale, controlling the narrative becomes extremely difficult. Every response, legal or otherwise, can shift perception in ways that are hard to predict or reverse.